Pete Goldsmith. I'm your host this evening for CocoaHeads 159. To get things started, in the spirit of reconciliation, Melbourne CocoaHeads acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Alright, the lineup for this evening, we're going to kick off with CocoaHeads origin stories. That's where I'll sit here, and I'm going to be interviewing Audrey and Pat this evening. Someone who's been around CocoaHeads for a little while, and someone who's reasonably new to CocoaHeads. We'll then follow that up with Baz, who's going to do a short talk on theming SwiftUI, and then Ben, who's joining us remotely, hopefully, is going to talk us through, I'm not going to read out the description there, something to do with very crazy font debugging. So, yes, the quick brown fox did not jump over the lazy dog in that scenario. So, we have our code of conduct here. If you're being harassed or notice anyone else that's feeling uncomfortable or have got any other concerns, please get in touch either in person to one of our organisers or by email or anonymously online. And you can find more details of our code of conduct online. To kick off some housekeeping, the bathroom facilities are through that door down the corridor and then to the right. And the emergency exit is down near the toilets. Name tags. Looks like we've got everyone with name tag, or most people with name tags. If you've got a red circle, that's those of us with red circles, we're organisers this evening. And if you've got a blue circle, you can call out that I'm new. Please make me feel welcome. Because this is a mixed online meetup, we would like to make sure that we don't interject with any questions throughout any of our presentations. If you do have questions, throw them in the meetup Slack channel, and we will be able to hopefully follow those up at the end. Massive shout out to our gold sponsor this evening, Itty Bitty Apps and Mantle, for hosting This Is the Venue, and Itty Bitty Apps. And our silver sponsors, Dias and Deloitte Digital. Upcoming events, we've got our CocoaHeads Drink Night on the 27th of September. You can look that up on Meetup or on our CocoaHeads Slack for details as to where that will be. I didn't put that on the slide. And there's lots of other amazing industry groups in Melbourne and other areas. So in Sydney, we've got our kind of partner CocoaHeads. You can check out their details at sydneycocoaheads.com. And there's also GDG Melbourne, which is really starting to kick back up for all of those following the Android or the Google side of things. How to find us, melbournecocoaheads.com. But you'll find most of all of the activity if you want to get in touch with anyone, or if you want to talk or find out more or follow up with anything that you've learnt this evening. Our Slack channel is really where the hub of everything happens. These are some Slack channels. If you join our Slack and you need to orient yourself through the noise of you've joined the general channel and it's all just commentary about the new iPhone and the Apple Watch and AirPods Pro that have come out today, these are the other channels that are a little bit more focused on particular things. So if you're looking for work, jump in the jobs channel, or if you're interested in jumping up here and doing a small talk, speakers, helping out volunteers and Meetup. One thing that we love to celebrate is anyone within our community that has shipped things. This month, Pablo has shipped an update on test flight for iOS 16 for his app Smart Home Widgets. If you would like to join the test flight beta for that, you can join our Slack and you'll find, scroll back in general a little ways, past all of today's noise. You'll find an invite link for Pablo's Smart Home Widgets where I've been using it. I've got a lot of HomeKit stuff, and now with iOS 16 you can use the lock screen widgets. So that is very handy. And if you're new here and you are shipping apps on the side, or you've maybe your jobby job has done something quite significant recently and you'd like to share that as well, let us know on Slack and we can put a slide up and share it out. So that wraps up most of the introductions for this evening. We're now going to kick into CocoaHeads origin stories. So the first person that I'll be interviewing this evening will be Audrey. If Audrey would like to join me on stage, I'm going to have a sip of my beer and then I will get started. So welcome to CocoaHeads Origin Stories. I personally am just super fascinated anytime I chat to someone about how they got into tech, how they got into the development that they're doing. Everyone's got fascinating stories as to how they got to where they're doing things today. And the first person I'm interviewing today is Audrey Tam. My first question is, can you introduce yourself? And do you remember the first CocoaHeads meetup that you attended or helped be a part of?
Introduce myself. Audrey Tam. Do I need to say anything more than that? I work for RayWenderlich.com. First, I actually was trying to remember the first CocoaHeads meeting. It was in the library, RMIT library. It was just a few people, really. Gareth was running it back in those days. It was only about Mac because it was before iPhones, and it was very intimidating, and I didn't know anything about what anybody was talking about. I do remember later on, I guess we got kicked out of the library, and so we were at some business people's place, and Jesse Collis and Stuart Gledo were giving a talk about the new keyboard shortcuts for Xcode 4.
Xcode 4, now that's a little ways back.
Yeah, that goes by. And
So
that was after we got kicked out of the...
you said that the first CocoaHeads meetup that you attended was in the library at RMIT. What compelled you to stumble upon the meetup?
I can't remember now. I started working at RMIT in 2002. And of course, Gareth he'd done software engineering in the department that I was working. So I might have heard something through email, or I might have run into him, and he said, this thing is going on, and come along.
Did you have any exposure to Mac development at the time when you joined the meetup?
Don't think so.
No?
Sometime around then, I went up to Sydney, and I've just forgotten his name. He was working at UNSW, and he was running sort of, just Cocoa courses, really. So Xcode courses. And it was before Xcode 4 because
It was before
Internet
iOS.
Interface Builder was separate.
Yep.
And it was very confusing. And so that was one experience. I don't remember why. It just seemed like a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Nice. So let's step all the way back. So you said you were working at RMIT in 2002, but all the way back, how did you get introduced to technology or computers, or how did that kind of come about?
When I was in year 12, I was allowed to go to the university and do 2 subjects per semester. And so the first semester I did calculus and Fortran.
Right.
So that was through the engineering department. And in the second semester, I did PL1. I didn't like that. And that was it, really. That got me started. And when I went on to graduate school, I used Fortran quite a lot. And when I went to work for IBM, I used Fortran a lot and had to sort of dabble in the PL1.
Right. So when you said you joined IBM, whereabouts was that?
San Jose.
San Jose.
It's gone now. It's I tried to look it up on Google Earth a few years ago. Tumbleweeds.
Tumbleweeds.
Literally, tumbleweeds. Used to be several buildings, great big buildings, and I understand what they used to build there has moved mostly to Tucson, Arizona.
Yeah.
But I did expect the buildings would still be there, but yeah.
Nice. So you were doing Fortran at IBM, and somehow in the middle you did some other stuff and you ended up at RMIT.
The IBM thing, my manager said, he was an electrical engineer, and he said there was an impedance mismatch. And I was okay, but I wasn't really happy. And so I ran into this guy I had met at graduate school, and he was just finishing up, and he didn't want to stay in America, and I'd never been to Australia.
Nice. So what year did you come out to Australia?
86.
86. Nice. And did you join academia straight away?
I looked around at other jobs, but it was easiest just to start working as a lecturer.
Yep.
And so I started in a math. In those days, the math departments did computing.
Yep. Okay.
'Cause nobody else. And so I was mostly doing the math stuff, but I think I was teaching Pascal. I was teaching some sort of programming language.
Yep.
And then it was very uncertain. Like I was on a 9-month contract, part-time.
Right.
And didn't know at the end of the year if I would be rehired. And I could see the writing on the wall that math was not the way to go. And so I decided I would look for computing jobs. And Footscray Institute of Technology at the time was hiring. So I got a job there. And I was there until I moved to RMIT.
Nice. So, in my jobby job, sometimes I have to write internal training material. Do you find, I've always found any of the university technology materials like a fascinating process that kind of, how do you try and keep that sort of material up to date, whilst, I guess, being kind of still trying to stick true to academic fundamentals and foundations?
You just get used to what you have to do to make it academic.
Yep.
And then you just do what you can to stay current.
So what, are you reviewing it very frequently, every year?
Oh, yeah. Every year you have to update it. What I did do was, so I was mostly teaching Pascal and things like that. And then they told me to do the networking course out of Tannenbaum. And it's a huge book.
Yep.
And I was like, how much of this do I teach? And what's important? And so I went off and I did the grad dip computing at Melbourne University. So I could, sort of get an overview of what computer science was about. And so I was doing a couple subjects a semester and turning around and teaching them the following semester. A variation. I learned C programming over the summer. I went back and somebody had sent me, see, when you're a lecturer, book companies send you books.
Right.
Free.
Okay.
So somebody had sent me this book, and it was Object-Oriented Programming in C.
Sounds like an oxymoron.
It uses a lot of star.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. A lot of pointers to pointers. So my poor students got taught object-oriented programming in C the semester after I had learned C. from Alistair Moffat at Melbourne University.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I mean, he taught it straight out of Kernighan and Ritchie.
Yep.
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know, I wish I was introduced to object-oriented programming, I guess, at that kind of fundamental level. So,
Yeah, some of my students went off and I think they were already, so they were graduate students. They were already working at Bureau of Meteorology. And I ran into them years later and they said, oh yeah, we're, using all that stuff.
Nice. So, whilst you're at RMIT, when did Ray Wenderlich come about?
Oh, no, that was after I retired. So I took early retirement into 2012.
Right.
A few months later, I took over a short course. So it was a School of Design. The course was aimed at designers who needed to work with iOS developers.
Okay.
So it wasn't like they really were going to write apps. They just needed to know what was going on in this Xcode thing. And so I took it over. But by that time, I was getting a lot of people who really wanted to write their own apps, or they were being sent by their companies because all the iOS developers in Melbourne work for banks or insurance companies, and they couldn't hire any. So they sent their web developers along to learn how to write iOS apps. And so I started getting more of those. But the idea was that somebody could come into this course knowing nothing about programming. And, at the end of 5 Saturdays, be able to do something. So I didn't have material for that. And stumbling around, I discovered Ray Wenderlich. And they had the iOS Apprentice. Like you could download the first third of it or something for free. And that got me started. So my students learned Bullseye, like all the time.
Yep.
In the second or third week, they would do a Bullseye app. And then following year, Ray put out a call for tech editors. And I didn't get the job as a tech editor, but he was intrigued that I was a retired academic. And he said, we never had one of those write for us. Do you want to write for us? And so I started writing for them. And then I started writing book chapters. And then it turned out that, I think just based on the Zoom or whatever we had in those days, the telemeetings you had, there were people within Ray Wenderlich who wanted to see if I could do video courses. So at the time, Ray was running this thing called RW DevCon,
right,
over in Alexandria, Virginia. And he said, you were voted one of the people that we want to see present at RW DevCon. And even before I got there, he was saying, oh, would you consider doing video courses for us? Yeah. So
how do you find, do you enjoy doing the video courses?
I like writing them. I don't like the actual recording.
Yeah.
Especially the green screen stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't like that. It's getting better, but because I learn a lot. The rest of the people who work for Ray Wenderlich, they write about stuff they know. I write about stuff that I want to learn.
That's a good way to cut it.
Yeah. So they asked me to update update the concurrency. So that was GCD and operations. They asked me to update it, and I didn't know. I knew about dispatching to the main queue, and I would always go and copy the code to do it. So it was scary stuff. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. And then we updated the URL session one and basically rewrote that. And then anyway, and then earlier this year I just turned in the one on Reveal, the Reveal app.
Ray Wenderlich does a post on Reveal.
Well, Sean
just a nod out to the gold sponsor there.
Yeah, Sean commissioned it, so it's free. Everybody can go along and watch it if you want to learn how to use the Reveal app.
Yes.
And I didn't know how to use the Reveal app before I did the course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it was good.
So if you needed to create a new tutorial, how long does that take? Like, what's the time investment on your part? Because you said that, like, you enjoy...
It can take... I mean, there is, a certain timeline you're supposed to keep to, like, the outline. You get a week or two to come up with the outline, and then you have a week or two to come up with the sample project, and then you have a week or two to actually write the thing. And they would prefer it to be under 4,000 words, not counting code.
Right.
And, basically a 15-minute work through.
Yep.
Because, that's... the people who read are busy. I usually get away with longer. The shortest I can do it in is a couple of days, because we used to do this party trick where they would announce something on the first day of WWDC, and we try and get something out by the end of the week or early the next week.
Yep.
So yeah, I like those because I can't just sort of keep futzing around with it and, wondering about it. You just have to get it out. Other ones can take weeks.
Yep.
Yeah.
Who sets those time frames? Is that like upfront given to you, or do you kind of get to control?
Well, I mean, once you say that you're going to do one, it used to be the guy who ran the iOS team was pretty strict, but they've switched it over now to somebody else, and she's got a lot of other jobs to do. So I think she's not as on top of things. Okay, I'm what they call a platinum author, so I can pretty well do whatever I like.
Okay, nice.
Because I tech edit and I English edit my own, like do the final pass edit and everything, all myself. So then usually just the team lead will have a look through it to make sure it's okay.
Nice. So is there anything what are you working on right now for Ray Wenderlich?
Well, I just put to bed a video course for, I hate the title, Modern Concurrency. So it's basically Swift concurrency, async await, async stream, all that kind of stuff. And so Marin Todorov wrote a book really fast. So that's been out for a year or something. And then I've been gradually getting the video course together.
Nice.
And of course, things have been changing as I went along, and people have found bugs, and he's responded to the bugs in the forum, and that has to get worked back into the, Nice. But yeah, that was good fun.
Nice.
So, and while I was doing that, I wrote a tutorial on async stream and async sequence.
Yep.
And then we're just about to kick off updating the Swift UI books, the Swift UI Apprentice, and then from next October we're going to update the Swift UI by tutorials.
Okay, awesome. Nice. Guess I'm kind of checking time. Wrap up, kind of final question. Do you have any tips for writing material, like written material, to educate others? So I'm mostly super curious about this because, again, like I'm writing internal training material for my jobby job. Do you have any advice for how to educate others through written material?
Well, as I said, I come from a position of not knowing anything about it and then learning about it and writing about it. And so if it was difficult for me, then I explain it. Whereas I think you need to really work at it. If it's something you already know, you have to work very hard to try and remember what was hard about it. So I would say pass it by somebody, one of your juniors or something.
Yep.
And see how they go with it.
Okay, awesome. All right. Thank you very much for coming and sitting up here. Really appreciate your time. Cheers.
I forgot mine.
would you like to grab your beverage?
No, it's all right. It's just water. Oh, okay. Stay hydrated. Thank you.
I predicted this. Like in my graphic that I created, it was I
beer
had a
and
beer and the guest had a drink of water. So yes, this is welcome Pat Brown.
Hello. Thanks.
So starting with the same first question, when was your first CocoaHeads?
I'm not too sure. Was it 2 years ago? Maybe. I'm not sure if it was a CocoaHeads or it was the annual meeting. Was it the annual meeting?
It was the annual meeting.
Yeah. So I wanted to come to a hack night, and because I was learning how to code.
Yeah.
And then the first event that was on was the annual meeting, and then they voted for who was going to be on the committee, and
and no one wrote any code.
And I was there, and I just said yes, and then the CocoaHeads after that, I think, was at the up here that I came to, which would have been like the week after, maybe, and then, but yeah, it was only like a year or two ago, maybe. I'm bad with dates, so any date I say, go back a year or forward a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you joined about 1 to 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's going to be at most 2.5 years ago because I only got a MacBook like 2.5 years ago.
Nice.
So it's not going to be before that.
So you rocked up thinking you were going to join a hack night, write some code.
Well, I knew it wasn't the hack night, but I thought it was still a meeting. Like, no, I thought it was still a meetup. Yeah. And then it was the IBA office.
The volunteers organise a
Yeah.
meetup.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I misread that.
Yeah.
It was a great first meetup there.
It sounds horrible, actually.
That was all right. Good venue.
Yeah. Well done to have gotten thrown into.
It was intimate, you know.
Yeah. Oh, it would have been. And you somehow got lobbed into joining the committee.
Yeah, but
so like you're just awkwardly standing there, and someone said,
"Oh, yeah, but I don't know. I can't remember. It was ages ago. I just said yes."
Nice.
So it was good fun.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. So what do you do for jobby job at the moment?
Well, I'm a software developer, junior developer at Itty Bitty Apps. Nice. So I got the job through CocoaHeads, kind of like meeting Sean and if I go on a tangent, just either raise your hand or
If you go on a tangent, I'll be very grateful.
Okay.
Continue.
and also,
yes,
because oh no, you're doing this thing. Sorry, I'm an idiot.
No, you need to complete that.
No, I was gonna say I might, if I start not answering, if I'm not answering a question, and completely forget about it, you can feel free to re-ask the question.
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
If I care about the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't. What was the question I was answering just?
What do you do for a jobby job?
Okay, software developer at Itty Bitty Apps.
Nice.
Oh, iOS developer.
There we go.
Okay.
So software developer at Itty Bitty Apps.
Yes.
Right.
For about just under 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
So what were you doing in between the CocoaHeads meetup that you met the community and joining Itty Bitty Apps?
Learning how to be a software developer.
Learning how to be a software developer.
Yeah.
Okay.
I used to do system administration and solution architecture and business analyst stuff.
Yep.
And then I got an opportunity to just take time off. And at that point, I realized I like software, I like iOS programming. And so I just said, I'm going to focus on this for a couple of years. So I went out and bought the MacBook, and the rest is history.
And you dug in. Yeah. So you're doing system administration, business analysts, and you somehow discover that you enjoy iOS programming.
Yes.
How do you make that leap?
Okay. I'll keep this concise. When I was a kid, I loved programming, didn't know how to do it.
Right.
And this is the story, I think, where we kind of started the other day. And I was always trying to learn how to code Python, and I'd look at a tutorial. You might be able to relate to this, but it would always tell me to open up Notepad and start writing the code. And I would always not be able to, I'd get a tab, an indentation error and stuff, and I'd get frustrated and give up. This is when I was a kid.
Yep.
So I thought, I'm never going to be able to program. But growing up, I love computers. I love breaking things and fixing things.
Mm-hmm.
And I also tended to say yes a lot of times when people asked me for help, just fixing printers and fixing stuff. And I just become known as the kid that fixes things, right?
Yep.
So, and I worked at a news agency, so I got like met a lot of people, and word spread in the community to ask Pat for help. And then I still didn't know how to program, and then I ended up buying the news agency. Like, sort of, I took it over as a business, and I kind of focused on running businesses and stuff.
Yep.
And at the same time, I went to uni to get a business degree, thinking I'd make it official.
Right.
And when I finished my business degree, one of my friends was finishing up at an IT, sort of like IT service provider or whatever it is, a managed service provider. And he goes, "Oh, you'd probably be good at this. Do you want to go for a job?" And I'm like, "Oh." And at that point, like, I was sort of, the business was kind of running, and like it ended up being like, it was a family business. I started there originally, and then like by that stage, Dad was running things, and which we have different sort of points of view when it comes to customer service and stuff. Anyway, I wanted a change, so I'm like, yeah, I'll go for this job, which was in IT. And then, like, within the first week, I was out on a client site doing stuff with Windows Server. I didn't know what Windows Server was, but I'm like, oh, this is actually fun. This is what I do at home anyway, just mess with things, right? And I'm like, people are getting paid to do this. So I thought it was fantastic. Anyway, what I did is, one of the senior guys had to go to install, I can't remember the question, but I'm sure it was something. But one of the senior guys wanted to install a backup server or something like that. So all I had to do was he just wanted someone to help him lift something into the server rack. And
so the ask was like physically
physically lifted.
Physically lift.
I was a level 1 system administrator when I started.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, just say yes to things, really give it your all. Because because up until that point, I hadn't actually had a job before that I felt like, because I had worked for myself a lot. And I also did web development when I was a kid, just freelance, but I was always using like templates and stuff. So I never felt like I actually knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
But so I'm doing this IT thing, saying yes, went to this place. They had their own system administrator, like their in-house guy. And when I went into to just help install the server, I'm speaking to the employees, and they're just all upset that they can't scan to email anymore. And I'm like, I'm just asking around, like, yeah, the guy's been trying to fix it for 3 months. And I'm like, oh, here's a challenge. And then, so I fixed it that day. And then everyone's like, oh my God, that kid's fixed the scan to email thing.
Yeah.
And then that company ended up speaking to my company saying, we want that guy working for us, like as in just consulting out or whatever. And so they ended up, like, the next week I was out there, they got rid of their internal guy. And they sort of, then I became,
they got rid of
it was actually really weird. They had to lock out the systems, and we had to sort of get passwords and stuff like that. We didn't have access to everything. It was kind of fun. I'm like, this is interesting I'm 2 weeks in. And anyway, so it was a construction place with like 250 employees.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I didn't like to let people down.
Yep.
So I would always try to do my best. And over time, I had no benchmark. I had no sort of, I guess, way to calibrate what normal sort of work was. I didn't know what the normal effort was. I just thought, because I'm not very good, this is all very, like, I'm putting in a lot of hours, I'm doing this stuff. But over time, because I was basically running a place by myself, I called up the senior guy that helped me once, and he got angry with me. And I'm like, I'm never calling this guy again. Yep. Like, I just felt, because I'm like, oh, I'm asking for help. And then anyway, so he sort of gave me some attitude, some sass. And I'm like, all right, I'll just do it by myself then. And so then I was out, at this client site. I was doing like a bunch of stuff, and I got a lot of experience quickly, and it was really good. But as a company, we also did software development.
Yep.
So I was out on a client site, and then eventually I ended up, I was in the office and stuff, but one time I was just hanging out with the developers, and I saw them doing something on the screen. I'm like, what's that? And they were in IDE, which I didn't know what it was.
Oh, not Notepad.
Yeah, so that's like, I'm used to seeing your code in Notepad, and I saw this guy run just a line of code to test it. I'm like, that's fantastic. And then he showed me some stuff, and I realized I could, with the system administration stuff, there's PowerShell, which is a language, and I had done other stuff with like batch scripts and stuff like that. But I started to use like more, advanced tools for my work, and I did a lot of automation stuff, and that's kind of what led me to kind of, even though I wasn't really programming, it was just automation. But eventually it kind of like, it's sort of just like step by step, I started to, anything that I was doing, like that I had a process and plan for, I just convert to some sort of automated flow, and it basically helped me do the work that I was doing, which meant I could spend more time speaking to the employees. And because I realized that if I speak to people and they like me as a person, I don't have to be as good at my job. Like as in I try to be the best that I can be, right? But at the end of the day, this guy could have been the best in the world, but he put a sign up on his chair that said, between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. or whatever is quiet time, don't interrupt me. I'm like, don't do that. Like, that's not, good. Even though he's thinking he gets to focus and fix. I'm like, man, these people just want to feel listened to, right? And you actually learn heaps too. It's like something that someone could be doing that takes them a bunch of time. Just by spending some time with them and listening to them, you can actually save them, like just by showing them how to do something differently that they've been doing and not realizing. It's like, I think, there were so many examples where I'd be watching the accounting ladies do something, and I'm like, oh, you can just sort of push that button and then it does all this for you in Excel or whatever. They're like, oh my God, and it's like, if you were just sort of fixing the things that you were asked to fix and not sort of listening to people, you miss those opportunities to save people time and then they're happier about their job. That's kind of what motivates me to do things, right? But anyway, we ended up, skip forward a bit because I've realized I've talked too long. But we ended up, I ended up doing solution architecture and business and analyst stuff for clients. And we had a client come in that we got involved in blockchain and cryptocurrency. Yep. And one of the clients came in and asked, and so I as a kid, I liked gambling. Like I liked poker, playing poker online. Okay. And there's a guy that I used to watch online, the guy called Tony G. If people watch poker, they might know who he is. But he was in the office one time. I'm like, oh my God, does anyone know who that is? And then no one knew who he was. And I'm like, oh, okay, just me then. And then I'm trying to play it cool, and I told my boss that, I'm like, oh, that's Tony G. And so he sort of made it obvious that I was a fan. And I'm like, well, you've just stuffed that up for me. But anyway, so what he wanted help with was trading, like cryptocurrency trading. And because I was starting an ICO and stuff, and I had experience trading when I was a kid, just because one of the guys that come into the news agency was a stockbroker and stuff, and so he taught me stuff. And anyway, so I jumped on that project, and he was doing trading, but because I was using PowerShell and automating stuff, I'm like, I could probably automate some of this trading stuff. Yep. And I ended up doing that. So I'd work during the day, and at night I'd sort of work on these bot things. And
PowerShell bots.
I started using JavaScript. Okay. So the reason I started using JavaScript is because I thought one day I always wanted to be able to make an app, or like someone comes to you with a cool idea, like a friend or family or whatever. Yep. And I was like, I want to be able to build that thing, solve that problem for them. But yeah, I never thought I'd be able to when I was younger. And I'm like, if I learn JavaScript, I might be able to learn React and React Native, which could lead me into learning how to make an app. Because I'd also made like fake apps, like with those, I think Marvel and like the bunch of, because we'd do MVPs for clients, and I'd use Figma and that, and I'd sort of make something that looked like an app, but wasn't an app. Like I'd get it working. And then half the time we'd spend like in meetings that would take ages trying to plan this thing out. I'm like, if we all just sat here and started building the thing, it'd probably be done by now. We've had so many meetings talking about what it could be, it would be done. And then I'm like, all right, well, let's, if I learn JavaScript, I can maybe one day code. And also with trading bots, a lot of people use Python. Like that was the thing. I'm like, that's not going to help me too much. I'll learn JavaScript. And so I started doing this thing. Some was in PowerShell because I had to get some stuff done. But eventually I just started using JavaScript. I got VS Code, which has changed my life. It was incredible. And then so at night I would build these bots. He lived in Lithuania and he was sort of traveling Europe and stuff. So his daytime would be sort of my nighttime, and we did a bunch of stuff. Anyway, it sort of all led up to a point where we were doing a conference in New York as like the company I was working at, we were doing like a blockchain. There was a big blockchain conference there. Anyway, it was also, Tony was going to be in New York as well. And it was like the first time we got to actually meet up in person since I started trading for him. So it was like a bit of a milestone celebration thing. Anyway, we sort of caught up. Things were good trading wise for him. And then from there, kind of, we went from New York to Vegas, and then I went to Lithuania because I had booked 2 weeks off work just because I'm like, oh, I'm going to New York. I might as well spend a bit of time in New York. And then, so I'm like, I had time off. He wanted to sort of celebrate in Vegas. So we went to Vegas. We took a jet from New York to Vegas. And,
as you do.
Well, it was all very surreal at the time, right? Because
Yeah,
I was just a dude not trying to learn how to program on my laptop. I accidentally washed all my stuff before we went to Vegas and fell asleep, and it got left in the dry cleaner. So when we got up in the morning, I had no clothes. I went to like H&M or something, and then rocked up to his hotel. I'm just in track pants and a t-shirt and stuff, and I've got a H&M bag. I'm standing next to all these guys in suits and, you know, their suitcases and stuff. And they're like, who's this dude in track pants? But then, because Tony we had a good relationship or whatever, Tony's like, they're like, why does Tony give a shit about that guy? And then I just became a sort of like his sort of like, he'd asked me advice for some of his businesses and stuff, and we built a relationship from there. And eventually that sort of become my sort of full-time thing, trading and sort of helping him. And sort of I ended up, because I was doing incident management and stuff at work, and I just become like, I tried very hard to justify staying at the business, but I'm like, it's just, it's more fun doing what I'm doing here. And then over time though, I realized I didn't like the trading as much, like as in the money from it. I liked the actual programming, like solving the problems.
Yep.
And then what happened during that whole COVID thing, we were trading, and I remember, because we'd sort of bet against the market and stuff, and we picked, when things were getting bad, we sort of picked a time where we bet heavy against the market. And it was just before Trump announced that they were closing travel from Europe. And it was like I remember it really well, because I was like, it was bittersweet, because we made a bunch of money, but then I had dinner with my old man that night, and he was sort of upset because his superannuation had sort of like gone down. I'm like, this is shitty. I'm like, how can I be happy when people around me are worse off? Because it just wasn't, I didn't like that sort of thing, and it was sort of long hours and stuff like that because the markets didn't really close. I'm just like, I need a change. I need to stop what I'm doing and sort of pull out of, it took a bit of time to sort of get everything out, but I'm like, I just want to focus on programming. And that's when I sort of bought the laptop.
Yep.
Kind of, and at that stage as well, and actually I hadn't bought the laptop yet, but a lot of the things that I was making for the trading bots, I'm like, I could probably open source this, right?
Yep.
Like, I'll just clean this up. And I thought, at this stage as well, I'm like, I'll try to learn how to program like properly, like follow a course. And I watched like a data, well, what was it? It was algorithms and, data structures or something course. And I learned like a lot of the stuff that I built myself with these bots. I started to make connections. I'm like, oh, because I built a thing like to connect to multiple exchanges, at once or whatever, or across different network connections and stuff. And I called it like proxy something or whatever it was. But then I'm going through and I learned about a thing called a queue and a priority queue or whatever. I'm like, oh, that's very similar to what I'm doing here. And then I learned that priority queues were how they used like to make GPS coordinates and stuff to make the shortest path. I'm like, that's fascinating. It just blew my mind that I started to sort of see these connections. I'm like, oh, okay, I can clean this proxy thing up and make it a priority queue that is just generic and people can use, because like it gave me something to work on that actually solves a problem or whatever. There were others out there, but I'm like, it will give me an opportunity to build something that is publicly presentable. Mm-hmm. And so I worked on that for ages. And initially I was just like, make it nice. But then I started checking performance stuff. And like, I've made it like, so it's clean sort of in that sense, like it's understandable. But I kind of want to make it fast now compared to the others. And because I'd had experience troubleshooting and stuff and digging into problems deeply when I was a system admin, I sort of took that to another level and made it like the quickest publicly available. Well, at the time that I tested it, it was like the quickest thinger. But then after that, I'm like, I needed something else. And I did. This is such a long answer to a question. I apologize.
Can't remember what the question was.
Yeah, no. But there was a point where I did an interview at Afterpay. One of my friends organized an interview at Afterpay. I'm like, I don't know Java or anything like that, but it was a Java interview, and they said you can do it in Java or Kotlin. I'm like, I know JavaScript. And then, so I spent 6 days learning Java, and I'm like, I'll learn Java first because that one came before Kotlin.
Yep.
So I'm like, I'll do that. And I'm like, oh, this is actually all right. Sort of a lot of frustrations I had with JavaScript Java was a bit weird actually. I did the thing the next day. Like I spent 6 days learning the language, 1 day to do the actual exercise. And then they took a bit of time to get back to me. And in the interim, I learned Kotlin because I'm like, I'll just redo it in Kotlin for my own benefit. And I'm like, oh, Kotlin's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm like, this blew my mind. I'm like, any sort of problem I had with JavaScript or whatever, or like, because I was learning TypeScript as well, sort of, I used that. I'm like, a lot of the issues that I was having, I'm like, this is so smart. So it actually, that's the sort of thing that made me realize maybe I can learn Swift. I'm like, Java and Kotlin, not Java, but Kotlin was like, all right, this makes sense to me. I'm like, so that's when after that, I was like, no, I'm just going to stick to iOS development. And I thought if I keep it narrow focused, then it will be best for me. and then the rest is history.
The rest is history.
So yeah, sorry for a long answer. But
no. That's
so the question was,
I'm not going to recap that.
Don't try. I knew I wanted to say that I learnt Kotlin. That made me like
Kotlin. You touched.
Yeah.
You learnt JavaScript. You went into the thing. Java had the same term as JavaScript, so you went down the path of learning Java. You then tried to learn for yourself Kotlin. You went, right, this is way better. And you realized that
because I was doing React Native as well.
Yep.
And so I was trying to work with the camera, like the scanner.
Yep.
And I was using there's some thing that you download like from framework or something for React Native thing just to like get it running quickly.
Yep.
But you didn't have much control over the camera and the barcode scanning and stuff. And that was the sort of thing I'm like, all right, well, I was pulling my hair out trying to get this working with React Native.
Yep.
I'm like, if I just build the whole thing, because I was building something for like an Australia Post delivery app thing, just because the place I was at could use it. And then I was like, all right, well, if I just rebuild this thing in Swift UI, and Swift UI was new to me as well, so it was like, I'm like, I'll just learn Swift UI. UI kit I didn't like too much, and because I was like, I had learned React Native as well in that time, so Swift UI made more sense to me, and it was just sort of fun, as new stuff was coming out, I get to test it out. Yeah, so
nice.
Any more questions? There's other stuff I want to talk about, but we've been through a lot. Sorry.
No, there's so much stuff that I wanted to expand on later.
I'm going to set my answers to 30 seconds or a minute.
I think we're getting pretty close to overtime anyway. So you believe that you're now capable of doing iOS development. You pick up Xcode. You start writing some Swift UI. Now is this... Obviously, you're not doing this at the time that you've already started the job at Itty Bitty Apps or you've joined the CocoaHeads meetup. How do you orient yourself or introduce yourself to iOS development? Like, what are your online...
As in my learning path?
Yeah. Short answer.
There's that 100 Days of Swift thing or whatever. Or
Paul Hudson's...
Yeah. Yep. There's the Stanford one.
Yeah.
There was a thing called Retro Rampage, which is a UI kit thing that I decided... It's like a clone of Wolfenstein. I decided to build it in Swift UI because it was the tutorials in UI kit. And I thought if I build it in Swift UI, it will give me some... Like, it'll make it a bit challenging.
That make you say it instead, or...?
What was that?
Did that make you sad instead, trying to achieve that in SwiftUI? Or
No, it was good
it
fun.
worked?
No, it was all right.
Okay,
Yeah,
nice.
It was fine. It was good. And then the Point Free video series, which I signed up for, that was a pinnacle moment for me. But,
Right.
yeah.
So the Point Free video series, you follow that course.
Well, yeah, I started watching the videos, and a lot of that clicked, resonated with me.
Yep.
And because they really were methodical about explaining stuff and sort of breaking it down to understandable chunks, and just sort of, I got to see someone else code, which I never got to really program with anyone as well. That's why I was coming to the Hack Night, or wanted to come to the Hack Night.
Yep.
And but yeah, so then I reached out to them and said, is there a place that people talk about this? And the guy's like, oh, there's the forum or whatever, one of the presenters, Brandon, and he goes, I could invite you to a Slack group that's iOS folks or whatever, which is a invitational Slack group or something like that. And it had a lot of people from like overseas, like California and stuff, and working at these companies, and they would post problems and I would just start solving them for people, because I'm like, I was doing my own thing, but as a break, it was cool to see other problems people were having. And then I just did that, and like sort of as a spare thing that helped me learn a lot too, because I'm like, oh, there's these challenging things people are having in real world situations, and that helped me learn.
Nice. Kept it short.
I tried.
Nice. I know now that like you've contributed quite a lot to Point Free repo. In the interest of time, I might wrap it up kind of there. One question though, do you have any advice for someone else who's kind of getting started into iOS development? Any kind of tip for them who's getting started into iOS development or programming in general?
Find a project or a problem that you're interested in solving, and sort of just build something that can solve that problem.
Nice. Solid advice.
Mm.
Cheers. Thank you very much for your time today, Pat.
Thank you.
Controversially, put my notes at the top this time. I thought that's an innovation.
All right, thank you everybody. Next up we have got Baz, who is going to run us through theming a SwiftUI app. Take it away, Baz.
Thanks, Pete. I'm a bit worried now that this isn't going to be anywhere near as interesting as Audrey and Pat's talks there, but we'll give it a try. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be here again. Just a quick talk about theming. First of all, I'm Baz, or Barry. I work for Lookout. We're a SaaS company making software that care companies use. You know the way everyone uses Xero for accounts? We're kind of like that for care teams, taking care of elderly and disabled people. So we're going to talk about a range of subjects tonight, starting with some light theory, and then we'll move on to the details of how I implemented a theme or themes. There's probably other ways to do this. This is just one example I'm not saying it's the best way, it's just one way. So let's see how we go. First of all, some theory. This is a book called Atomic Design by Brad Frost. You can actually read it online for free, or you can buy the book and read the book. You don't have to follow it religiously, but I think the basic concepts are really sound. And the basic concepts are, start with small things, which they call, or he calls atoms, which is things like a button or a text field or things like that, and build up. Molecules are combinations of those things, and then organisms, which is a bit of a strange term, but basically I think of an organism as like a screen. So building components on top of smaller components. So why do this? We get these kind of questions all the time. You know, can you just tweak this? Can you just do this? I'm not going to blame designers for this, but it's usually designers who do this. It's a bit annoying, right? It's slightly annoying, but you're trying to do your best. You're trying to make the app look as good as possible. But more importantly, this can lead to inconsistency in the design of your app. It makes things hard. Like over time, eventually this will build up and things will just become really hard to do. Like you'll just get so many different designs of your app that it just becomes annoying. You don't know what screen to copy for the next one you're doing. And everything just gets harder to build and so it slows down. So what I like to have is a thing that says like, this is an information card, or this is a subheadline, or whatever. And everyone knows what that means. There's no just tweak this and make this a little bit different. Much easier to work with. And that's basically atomic design. Now you don't need to use atomic design strictly, but those basic concepts of starting small and building up and componentizing are useful. Problem you have with components is naming them. Naming anything is always a problem. So you could call a headline or a title something like that, medium 22 point, whatever. Or you could call it secondary title. And that's an example of semantic naming, which, if you used to do web design back in the day, you'll know all about semantic naming of things through that phenomenal book that I've obscured in the corner there from Jeffrey Zeldman. It's a bit of a shame that we've kind of abandoned that in the web design world, but the concepts are basically sound. Describe things in terms of their meaning or their usage, and not in terms of their content or their composition. It gives you flexibility to change things later on without having to change the interface of the thing. You could say the secondary title, we've decided we no longer want that to be bold. You just change it internally as an implementation detail. You don't need to do a find and replace around your code to take the word bold out of the naming of it. Just makes everything a little bit easier. Here's some more examples of the kind of thing that is semantic, and you'll notice that this kind of tracks to what Apple do in their design. Apple's text sizes, I don't know if they call them sizes or text styles, follow this convention because it's a useful thing to do. Now, for the purposes of theming, we're going to talk about doing this for colors as well. And then when we talk about building components from other smaller components, then we get to things like saying, here's an action button. And an action button has a particular text size, and it has a particular background color, foreground color, font, stuff like that. But you encompass it all in a thing called an action button. So when your designer says to you, this screen has an action button, everyone knows what that means. There's no discussion about, does an action button have a bold font, or is it 14 point or 15 point or whatever. Everyone's on the same page, and you just have consistency throughout your app. So that's all easy, right? That's good. So far, it's all pretty basic, and everyone's doing that already in their apps, right? But they're not. That's not what happens in most code bases. We all probably kind of know it should be, but it doesn't really happen that way. I think a lot of that is evolution. It's hard to retrofit that sort of stuff. So I'm going to advocate for building this stuff up front, do it early, do it first thing you do when you build a new app. And when you've got that solid foundation in place, it's really easy to build on it and just keep it flowing as you increase the complexity of the app. Now, let's talk about wrappers. So wrappers are a simple component, right? So this component gives you a title, as you can see on the right-hand side. That title is styled in a particular way, but we don't see that style here because that's an internal component we've just built on top of that. That gives it a monospace font and it draws a pink line underneath. But anytime we need to have a screen that has a title on it, we just use this wrapper and we drop the content in under the title. And if we change the implementation of what a title looks like, every screen in the app changes and we have that consistency. We get dark mode for free, obviously in pretty much everything in SwiftUI these days. But we want a bit more. For this talk, we're going to talk about getting themes on top of just light and dark mode. So we'll bring together some of the concepts that I just talked about in that sort of introduction. I think the introduction is actually longer than the code part of this, to be honest, because it's not that difficult to do. But we're going to put together a bunch of themes. So that's like, that's 3 themes, and each theme has dark and light mode. So we essentially get 6 themes out of this. So step 1, decide on the colors that you want in your themes, which is the hard part. That'll take you about a month. And you'll go through various iterations of it and change your mind and go back and forward. But eventually you'll end up with some colors that you like. There's a good website called Coolors, which is really good for procrastinating about colors. You can take hours and hours and hours on that. So for this one, we're going to make the base theme really horrible. And it's going to be this terrible orange color and a kind of crappy looking gray. And that's to encourage people to change the theme, because that's what we want them to do for this one. Here I'm organizing the colors by naming them with the theme after the sort of semantic name of the thing. You could split that up in different ways. It doesn't really matter. In the code, I'm going to start with an enum with properties to expose our semantically named colors. So we're going to use 3 colors, or 3 purposes for our colors for this one. Background, foreground, and a highlight color. I've given 2 examples of how you could map those assets into colors there. You can use a switch statement, or you can just use the name. And you can argue in the pub about which one of those is the best way to do it. I deliberately left that there to cause a fight. But I actually don't mind. I can see benefits in both of those. It doesn't really matter. Basically, the point is you've got some way of mapping your asset catalogs into code. And from this point on, you should never have to refer to the asset catalog name in your code ever again. You can just refer to the semantic name from the theme. We could stop there. We could just use those. We could use that theme. So this is the swans theme and the foreground color. Of course, that's only going to give you 2 colors for dark and light mode for that. And in this presentation, we want to do multiple themes. So we're going to go a little bit further with this one. And to do that, we're going to use a theme service. I don't love calling this a service, but we'll go with it for now. And basically, this consists of a published value, which is the current theme. And that's it. But that doesn't really work if you restart the app, because it's setting the theme to the base theme every single time you restart the app. We want to persist the theme. That's pretty simple. We add an app storage property, which stores the current theme. And every time the theme changes, we set that, we save that, and then we read it on the initialization. So every time the app starts, we read in the theme from storage, and we use that one. So that allows us to persist our theme. I love this. I only discovered this last week, this app storage property, and it saves loads of code. It's great. And to use this service, we will just set it at the root. We'll initiate it at the root level of the app, and then we'll use the environment system to pass it into our subviews as we go. I'm not sure this is the best way to do it. Like, this works and it's fine. I think there might be nicer ways to do this. I tried doing it with an environment key, like custom environment key, and that worked fine for reading. I couldn't get it to write properly to do that, but I think that might be a nicer way to do this. But for now, we'll go with this because it works and it's okay. And then if we want to use that in a view, we use it like any other environment variable, and then we just refer to the color through the service and its current theme. And that works fine. So far you haven't seen the themes. So here, that is the base theme, which is lovely, orange and pink. It looks okay on these screens. Yeah, it's a great theme, but probably your users are going to want to change that to something a little bit nicer. So it works in light and dark mode, as we said, and here is how the colors map onto that: foreground, background, and highlight colors. So how do we change it? So for ease for this demonstration, I'm just displaying 3 buttons at the bottom of the screen with the name of the theme and a little preview of each theme on it. You tap on one of those and it just sets the theme in the service to be the theme that you've chosen. And that's it. And with our app storage property wrapper, that will just automatically save into user defaults and it'll persist. And as far as data goes, we're done. We're finished. And the final thing we need to do now is we need to redraw our app to use the new theme that's been selected. And to do that, we're going to use wrappers again. Just love that picture. So we're going to put another wrapper around our previous wrapper at the top level of the app. So previously, the top level of the app was the title wrapper. We're just going to wrap that in another wrapper, which we're going to call our theme wrapper, or themed wrapper. And the only thing the themed wrapper does is it checks which theme is being applied in a loop. Using themeservice.theme in that if statement there, when theme changes, that is enough for that to trigger a redraw of the app. And because this is at the top level, the whole app redraws and redraws every color that's referenced further down your view hierarchy. And that's it. It'll draw your themes. And this is a video, hopefully, yep, of me tapping on the buttons and the themes changing. I'm switching between dark and light mode as well a little bit here, and then just tapping the buttons at the bottom and it instantly changes. Pretty nice. And you can argue about your favorite theme after as well. One slight extra thing you might need to do. It works and it's all good, but it's not quite perfect if you're using UI appearance. If you're using UI appearance anywhere in your app to do, say, nav bars or cell backgrounds or something that's a little bit fiddly that SwiftUI doesn't allow you to change directly, you've got to handle that kind of manually in this case. So I've got a little function there on the theme service to update UI appearance things that we need to change. And then when we initialize the theme service, we run that. And anytime the theme changes, we run that again. And that is fine because you're reloading the whole app from the top level. It reapplies all UI appearance. And that's fine. I thought of another thing to say. I've got a thanks slide here, but I thought of one more thing to say. There is one problem with doing it this way, which is because you reload the whole app from the top, it will always take you back to the first, the initial screen of your app again when it reloads the whole thing. There's new stuff in iOS 16 that will potentially get you around that if you do a bit of state restoration stuff, which is maybe a way around it. But probably if you've got some place in your app that's like a theme picker, it's probably going to hang off a settings thing that's going to be near the top level anyway, so it's maybe not a huge problem, but you might have to work around that if you do it this way. Yeah, I think you're going to have some state restoration however you do this if you want to maintain your current position. That's it. Argue about your favourite theme. Any questions?
Yeah. Any questions for Baz?
What is your favourite theme and why is it this one?
Hang on 1 second.
Baz, what is your favourite theme?
Mine is the dark Roma one. I like that.
Controversial.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Baz? No? I think that was good.
Cool.
Thanks, Baz.
Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Baz. Now up to our last presentation this evening. We have now got Ben, who is joining us remotely through the magic of Rob, to talk us through this, which I'm not going to read out. All right, have we got Ben joining?
Fantastic. Take it away, Ben.
Thanks, Pete. So tonight, hello everyone. Long time no see, even though I was sort of there in Melbourne about a month ago now. It was a long time before that as well. Tonight, I'd like to share with you my experience diving down multiple rabbit holes to solve an issue with fonts being mysteriously clipped in our product here at PayPay. It was a immensely frustrating issue to resolve, and it just so happened that I had some time to tackle it, and so, well, I did. So a little bit of background first on the issue. So what, where, and why. We would receive sporadic reports that text was being clipped from our QA team, and it was selective reporting. Like if the string had the company name or other mandated text within it, they would be reported to the engineering team. Others would fly under the radar. And as 99.9% of the text in our app is Japanese, the only occurrences that QA and others would notice actually featured the company name. So it was, and more features meant more occurrences. It grew tiring fixing each issue as it kept cropping up, and something began just to not feel right amongst the team, but nobody really knew how to resolve it. We would just fix everything in a piecemeal fashion. The first fix, and I was directly involved in this, was a subclass, because why not? We decided to make a UI label subclass to fix the issue, and I know there's probably a few people being like, "Ugh, subclasses, just use Swift UI or something," but it's what we needed. And inside the subclass, we decided to override intrinsic content size. And our rationale for that was, well, the text was clipping, right? So the size was too small. The text wasn't fitting. It was going over the edge. So we needed to make sure that the label didn't clip. Let's give it a larger drawing rect. We did attempt to override text rec for bounds. I do remember that being on the table at one point, but I'm not sure as to why we didn't go with that. This was a few months ago now. And I realized a little too late that this was just a band-aid over the real issue. Because while the subclass solution worked for most cases, it only worked where we actually used the subclass. And it didn't work for UI button, where the issue was also presenting itself.
The first rabbit hole I decided to dive down was making another subclass, because we kept receiving reports of text being cut off, and it was a game of cat and mouse to replace standard UI label usage with the subclass. And obviously, if we forgot to use the subclass in the zib, the storyboard, or the class itself, then the text stood a really good chance of being clipped off. And more time would be wasted fixing it, with QA issuing more tickets and the general conversation hubbub that happens in Slack, and it's hard to track everything. And I'm not sure why it was me. It could have been any one of us in the team, but I'm going to be the one, even though I don't like being the one. I decided to ask the managers if they had any more data to give me, so I could attempt to fix all of them where possible. I guess I kind of shot myself in the foot there. But it turned out that 95% of the occurrences were with English characters. And the big thing there is we actually have an English mode. So foreigners in Japan that cannot read Japanese effectively enough to use a financial app can change the app into English. And every descending character was being cut off. 5% of the occurrences also clipped the character modifiers on Japanese characters. And that's the little marks that you can see there on the slide. They're called a dakuten and a han dakuten, quick background, and it changes the sound of the character, from example, a ba to a pa. And omitting this little modifier can completely change the meaning of the word, unlike English, where you can kind of just infer the meaning if some segment of the text is cut off. So it was an issue that absolutely needed to be resolved. So I decided to just ask around the local tech community. Turned out it was a familiar problem. And other apps in Japan were facing this issue, and they had tried to fix it using similar methods to our own. Everyone had come up with a label subclass or just a container view with no clips to bounds turned off, for example. And the base assumption tended to be that Figma, Sketch, whichever design tool here, didn't properly support Japanese fonts. So adjustments had to be made by engineering to counteract the resulting text clipping. I wasn't satisfied with that conclusion, that world-famous design tools such as Figma or Sketch didn't support Japanese text. I wanted to find out what was really going on, and I had some time because we shipped something early, right? And I had 3 or so days, 4 days to really sink my teeth into this. UI buttons and UI text view were also affected across the board as well, in both languages. It just didn't add up to me. And we really shouldn't need to replace UI text view with UI label, the subclass, and UI buttons with other classes and whatnot to work around the issue. The system just cannot be that broken, or so I thought. I wasted a lot of time building a temporary solution while I worked on this problem. I dove down yet another rabbit hole and built a UI control subclass to fix the issue, quote unquote, while I just kept digging. It looked exactly like a UI button class, and all the preset styles were included in it, but it used a custom label instead of the system one. The first attempt was a UI button subclass, which laid out a custom label directly over the top of the default label with a whole bunch of KVO and everything else to make it look like it was the real thing. And TLDR, I just git stashed that branch. I was like, no, and we're just going to do something else a bit easier. So where are we at now? This is what I forced myself to write down before. We grew tired of Wacka label. I checked Figma and Sketch. I opened so many documents that my MacBook, still the Intel one, I just upgraded to an M1 Max for work and doesn't have the problem, but it was very hot and very angry with 50 documents in Figma and Sketch open. All the fonts were rendering fine, and the text rect, line height, et al. Was completely fine. None of the zibs and storyboards, and I checked every single one of them, had fixed sizes on the labels. And other companies were facing the same issue, and I was just, it was really getting to me. I was like, I'm going to find this, I'm determined. But I should add, we don't make size static in our zibs, because I put a dot point here, because we do somewhat support dynamic text sizes. So I could have, increased the rect in constraints to like 40, made that the minimum, told everyone you have to make that 40 so it would fit, but it really wouldn't have been great overall. At last, about 3 days in, I had my eureka moment. We all know that the default iOS and I think macOS font as well is SF Pro, or at least SFUI. However, in Japan and in Japanese, the default font appears to be Hiragino Sans. I zoomed everything in and I examined the characters, the pixel layout. It was the closest match. I may be wrong, but I fully doubt that. I'm pretty confident. I examined far too many screens in iOS and macOS, and no screen seemed to have any issue with text being clipped, like descending Y characters if the languages were mixed. For example, like system preferences with Japanese suffixes on the end or whatever. No characters were being clipped, so something wasn't right. I fired up a test project. You'd think I would have done that before now, but I wanted to really examine the app to see if it was actually our problem first. And, Japanese characters, they all sit within a square. And this is where it starts getting into the meat of the issue. The periods, they sit within the square on the left-hand side in the bottom left corner. Everything is monospaced in Japanese and Chinese as well. I noticed that Korean, and an interesting aside is Korean is also somewhat monospaced. They have a unique height and a unique width, but they are not square. So I was not confident in testing the Korean default font for this. And because Hiragino is built around this square and it's been around the block, it's pushing 30 or more years old. If there were large issues with it, I'm sure it would have been fixed before now. More people would have seen it. And I'm saying this to myself when I was building this fix because I wasn't sure whether I was on the right track or not. I think people would have reported, an interesting aside here, unless people really didn't care and left the issues unreported for 30 years or more and just worked around the issue in Excel spreadsheets and Word documents. The font also may be older than 30, I will disclaim there. Wikipedia Sensei says the font has been sold to professionals since 93, but it may have been made before that. In addition, talking about the font itself now, it does support English, in brackets, Roman characters. And what do these characters have that Japanese characters do not? And that is ascenders and descending values. The next rabbit hole. In my test project, I put a UI label stock standard just on the screen and told it to display the text Konnichiwa. I printed the font and it told me it was SFUI regular, but upon examination, zooming real close in, the glyphs matched Hiragino Sans when they were Japanese, but the English matched SFUI. After much investigation, it seemed that the inferred font, in this case, in the zib saying system font size and just leaving it, will fall back to Hiragino using the cascading font mechanism as far as I'm able to tell, if its font glyph table cannot handle whatever character it's being told to display. So the font was SFUI, but it pulled those 5 kana out of Hiragino and put it straight in the label. For some reason, that's not broken when you just leave it. The text wasn't being clipped yet, so I added an English descending character into the same string, and there was still no clipping. But then I noticed that we were doing something in the PayPay app that I wasn't doing in my test project, and we were specifying the fonts explicitly. So I added an extra label to the test project and wrapped them in a UI stack view. The labels were identical, unmodified, UI label objects. They had the same font set in the zib. They had both the same string preset, and in code I specified the font for only the left one, well, in the top one in the screenshot I'm about to show you. And the results surprised me. It seemed that the fonts were being returned incorrectly. I did a loud sigh and head desk at this point. My first message to the team was to subtract 1 from the font size specified in Figma to avoid this issue. But we decided that this would have a few nasty knock-on effects. 1, we could forget to do that, and clipping tickets would still be filed by QA and would address, because, human error is a thing. And 2, subtracting 1 would affect the English mode, because we use a different font for that. We don't rely on Hiragino Sans. But in that mode, because certain things are Japanese specific, we do display some basic things in Japanese. The text would be too small if I did that, ultimately, I decided, so not a great value. Not a great solution, rather. I then printed out the descender and ascender values, as well as the line heights from each font, and they were all inconsistent when I specified the font. I specified the same size as what I had set in the Zib, and everything was just completely inconsistent. And I wonder whether SFUI, like its font metrics, were being used in that case or not. Like the ascending and descending values were adequate enough to display everything. But when I specified Hiragino Sans, it was not. So I decided to take that left tween at Albuquerque, as Bugs Bunny likes to say. I dove into the font properties, and I certainly noticed that the descending value was just too small, and the line height needed to change because of the 1.2x size issue. I think I've accidentally skipped a slide. Sorry about that. Yes. Sorry, I'll just go back to this one. My bad. If I set the initial advice aside, if I jack the font size down a little bit anyway, it actually didn't restore the clipped descender or ascending characters, so I decided to investigate a little bit further. Now we're on to this one. Diving into the font itself, yes, the descending value was a bit too small, and the line height needed to change, and I say because of the 1.2x size issue. When I examined it visually, the 20 points and 20 points that I supplied equally in Zib and in code, the value that I received on the screen was roughly, and with careful calculation, 1.213 times bigger than what I actually wanted. And it's not perfect, but I took that left turn and decided to swizzle the font itself using an extension. So I ended up, multiplying the descender and ascending values by that value that I was able to determine with math. It's ugly, but it worked. And it's not perfect, as swizzling rarely is. The value I multiply with is literally just a careful guess. It's a magic number. It could be wrong. It could be slightly too much, could be slightly too little. Visually, it seemed to fix the issue. However, all of the recs now line up with Figma perfectly when I take a screenshot of the device or I fire it up in Reveal and I have everything up on the screen. I'm like, every rect that I'm seeing matches exactly what has been specified on screen. So great. And there seem to be 0 remaining font clipping issues in the app, because like most swizzling extensions, you call them in like app delegate or something, or scene delegate, wherever you wish to. It fixed the issue. And now I sit here and I wonder, where do I go now? Decided to keep calm and fail a radar once I figured out all of this out, and I pushed my PR up to introduce the swizzle, and everyone was bamboozled by the Objective-C associated object code, which they all termed dark magic. I don't know whether this issue is specific to iOS and macOS. I genuinely don't. I wasn't going to spend much more time on it. To be truthful, it was a week at that point. I built a little sample project and I sent it off to Apple, but I have radars up there as we do all. That's not the right phrasing, but you get what I mean. From 2008 that are actually still unresolved. So I'm not going to hold my breath because I will asphyxiate, no doubt. And I can't help but wonder if this issue has reared its head anywhere else that anyone has ever noticed, and whether, and if you can think of any, I'd love to hear from you. Alternatively, if you can think of any other solutions that I could have used instead of swizzling everything in the end when it came right down to it, I'd love to hear from you, and I'm happy to replace that at any point in the code base, because I really don't like doing it, but it was everything I needed. So that's everything. That's all from me tonight. Thank you for hearing me rant about the rabbit holes I was diving down over the past few weeks. I'll stop my screen share now and hand over back to Pete and Rob.
Did you have time for questions before you duck off, Ben? Does anybody have any questions? We have a question. Hang on a sec. You can hear us, right? I think. No, we can't.
No, sorry, I can't hear you.
How about now?
Yep, that's great.
Yep. Right, got a couple of questions. Hang on. Amy had a hand up first.
Hey Ben, love the talk and the in-depth into fonts and glyphs and everything. My suggestion is, if you just went for the system font everywhere instead of specifying something explicitly, would it solve the issue?
I did think about that actually when I was doing this, but our use case doesn't really allow that actually, because we use a different font entirely for English mode versus Japanese mode. We actually do specify that this is the font we need to use right now, and falling back to system would work for Japanese, but English would actually still be broken in that case, because we do mix glyphs. So we'll have 3,000 yen written on the screen, and there's digits 3,000, and then the little yen symbol, which came from Hiragino by default, no other option, and it was also being clipped and removed. And it seemed to be, no matter what I did, if I left it automatically select, it would clip one or the other. And ultimately it was, well, can we accept monetary amounts being clipped off from the screen? And we thought, well, no, it is a financial app and the user does need to know how much is being displayed, the currency symbol, even though it's relatively obvious here. We can't let those sort of things fly. So I'm fairly confident in my ability in the swizzling decision. But obviously, I think if we didn't support English and we did just support Japanese text, it wouldn't be a problem. We'd be able to rely on the system font and having it cascade down to whichever font table it needed. So it was a catch-22.
So if I follow correctly, the issue still occurs if it's just no explicit definition of a font. Yep.
Yeah, it was occurring in all use cases for us, so it was vexing, to say the least.
Hi, thank you for the speech. Was good. Just curious, did you had to roll back all the subclasses, the UI button and UI labels, after your change, or that just went quite along with it?
Sorry, I couldn't really hear Hugh's question all that well. Was that about the subclasses, whether they're still around?
Yeah, have you rolled all that back now?
Sorry, Hugh, do you mind repeating your question? Sorry.
Question was, have you rolled back all of the subclasses now?
Yes, actually, like the subclasses were able to just go, and I talked with my team and we decided on what I termed as soft deprecation. So don't delete the file and just remove it all completely. Just stop using it and still leave it there in case we need to fall back on it. But so far so good. We have 0 usages of the subclass left. It was a mammoth task to try to replace them all in the zibs, but we did, and it still allowed the project to compile, obviously, because the class could still be found if we missed one. I think thankfully we've passed that period, but yeah, it was cathartic to clear out 800 plus lines of crazy subclasses and replace it with a short swizzle.
I bet it was. Thanks very much, Ben.
Thank you.
Sweet. Thank you very much for that, Ben. We are now wrapping up this evening. Massive thanks to our sponsors, Itty Bitty Apps Gold Sponsor and DS and Deloitte Digital. Again, a reminder that next up, Tuesday the 27th of September, we've got the CocoaHeads Drink Nights. Head to our CocoaHeads Slack for more details on that. And just before we head off to the pub tavern, we've got 2 book vouchers for any book from raywenderlich.com. Hands up. The way that I'll do this is that we'll do hands up. I'll count the number of hands. I'll run a random number generator twice, and I will distribute the winners. So hands up if you'd like a book from raywenderlich.com. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Sorry? How am I going to remember the number? Scanning from left to right will be numbers 1 through to 10. So please keep your hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in blue and 12 in black. All right. So make sure that I'm doing my random number generator. Okay. First winner is number 2, gentleman in orange shirt and black jacket. Fantastic. Congratulations. Hands back up. And random number is 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. Gerald. There we go. Fantastic. Awesome. Details on those vouchers, hit me up or Audrey shortly after the meetup. After this, we are going to head off to Mida Tavern, follow the general group to details, or look it up on your favourite Maps app. And that is a wrap. Thank you very much for joining us. Massive shout out to Rob for AV and coordinating all of this. This is amazing. Thank you, Rob. Cheers.